Welcome. Tonight we are going to the mountain. Not the sharp, cold peaks of the alpine world, not the bare rock and ice of the high altitude where only the hardiest plants cling to the cliff faces and the air is too thin for most mammals. We are going to a different kind of mountain, the specific mountains of Central Africa, the Virungas and the Bwindi, the ranges that sit on the equator and that carry their forests all the way to the summit, the dense moss-covered forest that receives the clouds as they roll in from the Congo Basin, and that holds the moisture in the soil and the bark and the hanging moss in a way that makes the air itself feel saturated, heavy with the smell of earth and growth and the particular sweetness of the high-altitude equatorial forest. We are going there because the animal we are here to meet tonight lives in those forests, has always lived in them, and carries in its enormous body and its patient social life the specific character of the place that has shaped it. We are going to spend tonight with gorillas. Find your position now. Let the weight of your body settle completely into the surface beneath you. The gorilla you are thinking of, if you are thinking of the mountain gorilla, is settling into its night nest at roughly this hour, the large body bending the branches and folding the vegetation in the practiced way of an animal that builds a fresh sleeping platform every evening of its life. The nest is not elaborate. It takes a few minutes to construct, the gorilla turning in a circle and bending the surrounding plants inward toward the center, creating a cushioned ring of compressed vegetation that the body will rest in through the night. The silverback may build his on the ground, the largest individual in the group with the least to fear from the predators that the elevated nest protects against. The ground nest of the dominant male, the architectural expression of his position in the social world of the family. Your breathing is slowing. The forest is around us, the equatorial night coming quickly, as it always comes at this latitude. The brief twilight giving way to the complete darkness of the forest interior, where the canopy overhead closes the sky and where the only light comes from whatever moon or stars might be visible through the occasional gaps. The sounds of the forest shift as the diurnal species quiet and the nocturnal world begins its activity, though the mountain gorilla's forest is not the acoustically dense world of the lowland tropical forest. It is quieter, the high altitude reducing the insect diversity, the specific chill of the mountain night settling into the air as the temperature drops 10 or 15 degrees from the afternoon warmth. The number that anchors this conversation: there are approximately 1,100 mountain gorillas alive today in the wild. 1,100. That number has grown from a low of approximately 620 in the 1980s. The recovery, one of the few genuine success stories in the conservation of a critically endangered great ape, the product of 40 years of sustained protection and community engagement and anti-poaching work in the specific forests of the Virungas and Bwindi. 1,100 individuals is still a very small number for a species, still a number that places the mountain gorilla in the critically endangered category, still a number that reflects how close the species came to being lost entirely. But it is larger than it was, and the direction of the trend matters enormously when you are talking about an animal this slow to reproduce and this dependent on the specific forests that the specific human pressures on the specific landscapes have been threatening for the specific decades of the conservation struggle. The word gorilla. The name comes from the Greek account of a voyage by the Carthaginian navigator, Hanno, along the west coast of Africa around the 5th century BC, in which Hanno describes encountering wild, hairy people who his interpreters called gorillae, though whether those individuals were gorillas in the biological sense or another species, or simply people, remains debated by historians. What is not debated is that the word entered the scientific literature in 1847 when Thomas Savage and Jeffries Wyman formally described the western gorilla from specimens and reported accounts, and that the word has carried ever since the specific weight of the specific human encounter with the specific animal, the specific combination of the recognition and the fear and the wonder that the gorilla has always produced in the human observer who meets it for the first time. Close your eyes, or let them soften. The family group is somewhere ahead of us in the mountain forest, settling into the night. The silverback is the largest and the most immediately visible member of the group, the silver saddle of grey hair across his back that gives him his name developing after the age of 12. As the male reaches full maturity, the specific coloring that distinguishes the adult male from the black-coated females and the younger males, and that announces his status to every gorilla in the area. He may weigh 200 kilograms. He may stand nearly 2 meters when he rises on his hind legs. He is the largest living primate, the most massive, the most immediately physically impressive animal in the forest he inhabits, and he is, in the specific way of the dominant silverback who has held his group for years, calm. Not the anxious calm of the animal that is always assessing threats. The calm of an animal that is genuinely secure in its world, the family. The mountain gorilla lives in stable family groups of 5 to 30 individuals organized around the silverback, his females, and their offspring. The social unit is not the dominance hierarchy of the capuchin troop or the fission-fusion community of the chimpanzee. It is closer to what the word family actually means, the specific long-term associations of specific individuals bound by the specific relationships of kinship and shared history that the years of living together in the same forest produce. The females in a silverback's group are not necessarily related to each other. They have typically immigrated from other groups as young adults, transferring to the silverback's group through a process that involves the specific assessment of the silverback's quality and the specific quality of the group he leads. Once established, a female may remain with the same silverback for decades, raising multiple offspring within the stability that his protection provides. The silverback protects. This is his primary function in the social life of the group. The specific vigilance and the specific willingness to place himself between his family and whatever threatens it being the specific behavioral expression of the specific relationship between the dominant male and the group he leads. The silverback who charges a threat, who stands between an approaching predator or a strange male and the females and infants of his group, is performing the behavior that the females assessed when they chose his group, the behavior that justifies the specific social contract of the gorilla family, the female's loyalty and reproductive investment given in exchange for the male's protection. The charge is spectacular. The silverback stands upright, beats his chest with cupped hands, producing the hollow drumming sound that carries through the forest, screams, throws vegetation, then charges at high speed, stopping just short of the threat or continuing through if the threat does not retreat. The chest beat is not simply aggression display. Research has shown that the acoustic properties of the chest beat, the peak frequency and the duration, correlate with the silverback's body size, the beat functioning as an honest signal of physical capability that the receiver can assess from a distance. The silverback who is large enough to threaten genuinely produces a chest beat that sounds different from the one produced by a smaller male, the physics of the cupped hands against the large chest, producing the specific resonance that the body size creates. The performance is authentic because the body it advertises is real. The gorilla body. The mountain gorilla is built for a life of sustained physical effort in dense vegetation at altitude. The arms are longer than the legs, the chest is deep and broad, the hands and feet are large and powerful. The gorilla moves primarily by knuckle walking, the weight distributed through the knuckles of the folded fingers rather than the palms, a locomotion pattern it shares with the chimpanzee, and that reflects the common ancestry of the two species before their lineages diverged approximately 6 to 7 million years ago. The gorilla can walk bipedally for short distances, and the silverback, who rises on his hind legs during a charge, is temporarily the most imposing figure in the forest. The full height of the animal visible and the full volume of the chest beat produced from the chest at its maximum expansion. The hands of the gorilla are, like the hands of all great apes and all humans, the specific expression of the primate body plan's defining feature. The opposable thumb, the broad palm, the sensitive fingertips that can grip with enormous force or handle with extraordinary delicacy. The gorilla that strips a thistle of its spines before eating the plant, removing the sharp points with a precision that the observer watching it finds almost fastidious, is using the same hand that moments earlier bent a branch the thickness of a human wrist. The range of the hand's capability in the gorilla is not different in kind from the range of the hand's capability in the human. It is different in proportion. The gorilla's greater strength, making the powerful end of the range more powerful, but the dexterity at the fine manipulation end is comparable. The diet. Mountain gorillas are primarily herbivores, eating leaves and stems and roots and bark, and occasionally fruit when the high-altitude forest produces it, which is less frequently than the lowland forests where the lowland gorilla subspecies live. The mountain gorilla has adapted to a diet of low-calorie, high-fiber vegetation that requires large amounts of material to meet the caloric needs of a large body. The gorilla spending roughly a third of its waking hours eating and moving slowly through the forest from one food patch to the next. The digestive system processes the fiber through a combination of a large cecum and the specific microbial community in the gut that breaks down the cellulose. The gorilla cannot digest itself, the microbial fermentation being the gorilla's mechanism for extracting nutrition from the plant material that most mammals cannot efficiently process. The Galium vine is a staple food, the specific climbing plant of the Virunga and Bwindi forests that the gorillas pull through their hands to strip the leaves in the practiced motion of the experienced feeder. The thistle, the celery-like lobelia, the wild ginger, the bamboo shoots in season, the specific plants of the high-altitude forest that the gorilla's knowledge of the home range locates and exploits through the year's foraging. Each family group has a home range of several square kilometers that it knows intimately, the silverback leading the day's movement through the range toward the food resources that his experience of the forest tells him are most productive at this time of year, in this season of the mountain's specific food cycle. The infant, born weighing approximately 2 kilograms after a gestation of roughly 8.5 months, the gorilla infant enters the world helpless and dependent in the way that all great ape infants enter the world. The altricial birth that requires years of intensive maternal care being the specific reproductive strategy of the large-brained, long-lived great ape lineage. The infant clings to the mother's chest for the first months, then begins riding on her back, the specific position that gives the young gorilla its view of the world for the first years of its life, watching the forest from the elevated platform of the mother's broad back as she moves through the vegetation. The mother gorilla is the infant's world for the first 3 to 4 years of its life, the nursing that continues through this period, providing both the nutrition and the social contact that the infant's development requires. The weaning process is gradual, the infant transitioning slowly to solid food while maintaining the nursing relationship that it will eventually relinquish, the specific timeline of the transition reflecting both the infant's development and the mother's reproductive state. The female gorilla does not conceive again until the previous infant has been weaned, the interbirth interval of approximately 4 years, reflecting the enormous investment of time and energy that each offspring represents. Sleep is approaching. The forest is quiet around us, the specific quiet of the mountain forest at altitude, where the temperature has dropped into the low single digits and the moisture in the air is condensing on the leaves above and dripping in the slow, random way of the nighttime condensation through the layers of the forest. The gorilla family is in its nests, the infants against their mothers, the juveniles in their own small nests close to the adults, the silverback in his ground nest or his lower canopy nest, a few meters from the center of the group, present and available and aware in the specific way of the dominant male who never fully releases his vigilance even in sleep. The sound of the silverback breathing in the dark is the sound of a large organism at rest, the slow, deep respiration of a body that has done its work today and that is now doing the body's maintenance work of the night. The forest is around him, and his family is around him, and the night will pass as it has passed every night of his life, and the morning will bring the specific demands of the day. Breathe slowly now. The mountain forest is around us, and the gorillas are in their nests, and the night is settling into its deepest cold. We are going to spend more time in this world before the sleep takes hold, but the breathing is already slower, and the weight of the body is already settling. The research. The understanding of the mountain gorilla that we now have was built through one of the most extraordinary sustained scientific efforts in the history of primate research, the decades-long field study that Dian Fossey began in 1967 in the Virunga Mountains of Rwanda, and that has continued without interruption through her murder in 1985 and through the civil wars and the political upheavals that made the Virungas one of the most dangerous field research sites in the world for decades. Fossey's work, which produced the first systematic behavioral data on the mountain gorilla, and which formed the foundation of everything that has been learned since, was carried out in conditions that the academic researcher in the comfortable institution finds difficult to imagine. The specific hardship of the high-altitude field site, combined with the specific political dangers of the specific region during the specific decades of the specific research, producing a body of work whose value is impossible to separate from the personal cost of its production. Fossé named the individuals she studied, not the neutral identification codes of the systematic researcher, but names, Digit and Uncle Bert, and Macho and Quelly and Puck, the specific individual names of the specific individual animals whose specific lives she was documenting through the years of the specific observations at the specific camp in the specific forest. The naming was criticized by some colleagues as anthropomorphizing, the projection of human qualities onto non-human animals in ways that compromise the scientific objectivity of the observer. The naming was defended by Fossé and by the researchers who have followed her as the specific practical tool for the specific individual identification that the long-term behavioral study requires. Both arguments have merit. The naming also produced something beyond the practical, the specific recognition of the specific individual as a subject of its own experience rather than a data point, and that recognition has shaped the relationship between the gorilla researchers and their subjects in ways that have informed the conservation advocacy that the research has generated, the individual personalities. The decades of the Fossé research and the decades of the subsequent studies by the researchers of the Dian Fossé Gorilla Fund and the other conservation and research organizations working in the Virungas and Bwindi have produced the specific longitudinal records of the specific individual animals that the long-term study provides. The specific silverbacks with their specific leadership styles, the specific females with their specific social strategies for managing their relationships within the group, the specific juveniles with their specific temperaments and their specific play preferences and their specific relationships with the specific other individuals of the specific group. All of it accumulated through the specific years of the specific observations into the specific portraits of the specific animals that the specific researchers who have spent the specific years in the specific forest know in the specific way that the long familiarity with a specific individual always produces. The gorilla that shows curiosity about the researcher's notebook, approaching and examining it with the focused attention of an animal that is genuinely interested in what the object is. The juvenile that initiates play with the older animals in the specific way of the bold individual who tests the limits of what the social hierarchy allows. The old female who has raised 4 offspring to reproductive age over the decades of her adult life and who moves through the group's social dynamics with the specific ease of the individual whose position is secure and whose knowledge of the group's history is the deepest of any living member. Each of these is a specific individual in a specific group in a specific forest, and the accumulation of observations of specific individuals across specific years is the specific method by which the science of the mountain gorilla has built its understanding. The knuckle walk through the forest. The gorilla family moves through its home range in the morning after the night's rest. The silverback typically leading, though the direction is often established through the accumulation of the group's movements rather than through any single individual's explicit command. The movement is unhurried. The gorilla's large body and its frugivorous diet mean that the day's foraging does not require the rapid travel of the frugivore, chasing seasonal fruit across a large home range. The gorilla moves from food patch to food patch through the familiar landscape of the home range. The silverback's knowledge of the range accumulated over the years of his tenure of the group, guiding the movement toward the areas where the specific vegetation is most productive at this time of year. The specific sounds of the movement through the vegetation, the crack of the bent branch, and the rustle of the disturbed undergrowth and the occasional vocalization between the individuals as the group spreads out through a feeding area, are the sounds of the gorilla family at work, the daily foraging that maintains the calories and the nutrients of the large bodies. The infants and the juveniles play at the edges of the feeding area, the mock charges and the wrestling and the tree climbing that constitute the juvenile gorilla's primary occupation outside of eating, the social play that develops the physical coordination and the social skills that adult life in the group will require. The night is very deep now, and the breathing has found the specific slow rhythm that belongs to the threshold of sleep, not quite asleep but very close, the mind releasing its hold on the day's thoughts one by one until only the quietest background remains. The gorillas are in their nests in the mountain forest, the family together in the specific proximity that the night's cold makes welcome, and that the social bonds of the group make natural. The silverback breathes slowly in his ground nest. The infants are against their mothers. The juveniles are in their own nests within reach of the adults. The forest is dark and cold and alive in the specific way of the mountain forest at altitude, the specific sounds of the night dropping into the silence that the temperature and the altitude together produce. Sleep now. The gorillas are in the mountain. The family is together. The night holds everything, sleep. The silverback is there. The infants are against their mothers. The mountain forest is dark. Sleep. The lowland gorilla. The western lowland gorilla and the eastern lowland gorilla, the two other gorilla subspecies alongside the mountain gorilla, live in very different environments from the Virunga and Bwindi forests. The western lowland gorilla, inhabits the rainforests of Cameroon and the Central African Republic, and the Republic of Congo and Equatorial Guinea and Gabon and Angola, the vast lowland forests of the Congo Basin that are among the most biologically diverse terrestrial ecosystems on Earth. The eastern lowland gorilla, also called Grauer's gorilla, inhabits the forests of Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, the specific forest zone that sits at the transition between the lowland Congo forest and the highland forests of the Albertine Rift. The lowland gorilla's diet differs from the mountain gorillas in one important way: fruit. The lowland forests produce fruit in abundance that the high-altitude Virunga and Bwindi forests do not, and the lowland gorilla eats it, moving through the landscape to follow the fruiting patterns of the forest trees in the way of the frugivore, rather than the pure folivore. This dietary flexibility has not reduced the lowland gorilla's dependence on leaves and stems as the primary food base, but the fruit eating adds a caloric richness to the diet that allows the western lowland gorilla to live in slightly smaller home ranges than the mountain gorilla's territory requires for a pure herbivore diet. The gorilla's remarkable adaptability to the vegetation resources of the forests it inhabits is one of the features that has allowed the genus to occupy such a wide range of forest types across Central Africa. The western lowland gorilla population is dramatically larger than the mountain gorillas, estimated at approximately 95,000 individuals, but it faces threats that the mountain gorilla has been partially shielded from by the intensity of its conservation programs. The Ebola virus has killed significant numbers of western lowland gorillas in several outbreaks, the disease crossing from other wildlife into the gorilla population with a mortality rate that can exceed 90% in affected groups. The bushmeat trade remains a significant threat, the large body of the gorilla making it a valuable target for hunters supplying urban markets. The habitat loss from logging and agricultural expansion reduces the forest available to the population in the specific countries where the specific pressures are greatest. The communication of the gorilla. The gorilla communicates through a repertoire of vocalizations and body postures and facial expressions that the researchers who have studied it have catalogued into a detailed picture of the animal's communicative capability. The deep, rumbling belch vocalization, produced primarily by satiated gorillas in contexts of social contentment, is the sound of the gorilla family at ease, the specific sound that the researcher who has been following a group for years learns to recognize as the acoustic equivalent of all being well. The pig grunt, the short barking sound produced in mild alarm or curiosity, is the sound of an animal assessing something unfamiliar. The loud, prolonged call that functions as an alarm and a warning is the sound of genuine threat. The specific scream sequences that accompany intergroup encounters or the silverback's interaction with perceived threats vary in their acoustic properties in ways that reflect the intensity of the emotional state producing them. The researchers having shown that the specific characteristics of the calls correlate with the specific physiological states that the contexts produce. The communication is not simply a fixed repertoire of signals, each with a fixed meaning. It is a flexible system whose specific outputs reflect the specific states of the specific animals in the specific contexts, the same underlying biology producing different specific expressions depending on what the moment requires. The gorilla's face expresses. The large mobile face of the gorilla, with its heavy brow ridges and its broad flat nose and its wide expressive eyes, is capable of producing expressions that the human observer finds immediately legible without any training in gorilla behavioral biology. The facial expression of the gorilla that is relaxed and content, resting in its nest in the afternoon, looks relaxed and content. The facial expression of the gorilla that is alarmed, the eyes wide and the brows raised and the mouth slightly open, looks alarmed. The facial expression of the gorilla infant playing with another infant, the specific play face with the relaxed open mouth that primates across the order use to signal playful intent, looks like fun being had. The evolutionary continuity of the primate facial expression system, from the most ancient lineages to the human, has preserved enough of the basic architecture of the emotional face that the cross-species reading of the gorilla's expressions by the human observer is not entirely projection. It is partly accurate. The western lowland gorilla has been the primary subject of the cognitive research on gorillas in captivity, the specific species that most gorillas in zoological institutions belong to, and that has therefore been available for the experimental cognitive studies that the wild research cannot easily conduct. The specific findings from the captive cognitive research on western lowland gorillas have established the species as a fully capable member of the Great Ape Cognitive Club, demonstrating the mirror test performance that indicates self-recognition, the use of gestural communication with human interlocutors in ways that show an understanding of communicative intent, the problem-solving in physical tasks that reveals causal reasoning, and the planning for future states that the specific experiments have elicited in the appropriate experimental conditions. The gorilla Koko. Among the gorillas who have been the subjects of the cognitive research, Koko is the most famous. The western lowland gorilla, born in 1971 at the San Francisco Zoo, who spent the subsequent decades in the study of Francine Patterson at Stanford, who taught Koko a modified version of American Sign Language and who documented the gorilla's production of approximately 1,000 signs and her apparent comprehension of approximately 2,000 spoken English words. The research on Koko and the research on other great apes taught gestural or symbolic communication systems in the 1970s and 1980s, raised fundamental questions about the nature of language, the nature of symbol use, and the cognitive capabilities that the non-human primate's brain could support when provided with the specific input of the specific training. The debate about what Koko's sign use represented, whether it constituted genuine language or a sophisticated form of associative learning that mimicked language, was never fully resolved to everyone's satisfaction. The specific empirical questions about the spontaneity and the productivity and the syntax of the gorilla's sign production remaining the subject of methodological disagreement. What was less contested was the evidence that Koko could use signs to communicate specific desires and specific emotional states and specific responses to specific situations in ways that went beyond the simple conditioned association of a signal with a reward. Whether that constitutes language is partly a question about what language is, and the gorilla research contributed to clarifying that question even as it left others unresolved. The forest at midnight. The Virunga forest at the hour of the deepest night is one of the coldest and quietest environments in equatorial Africa, the altitude reducing the temperature to the point where the breath is visible in the air, and the condensation on the leaves drips steadily in the darkness, and the gorillas are in their nests, in the specific postures of the sleeping animal that is maintaining its body temperature against the specific cold of the specific mountain night. The silverback has the advantage of his mass, the large body generating more heat per unit surface area than the smaller bodies of the females and the juveniles, his thermoregulation less demanding than theirs in the cold. The infants are entirely dependent on the mother's body heat for their warmth, the infant gorilla against the mother's chest, the specific expression of the specific thermal dependency of the small body on the large one in the cold of the mountain night. The specific sounds of the mountain forest at midnight are the sounds of the moisture condensing and dripping and the occasional movement of a nocturnal animal in the undergrowth below the nesting gorillas, and the distant call of a tree hyrax somewhere in the dark above, the specific high-pitched call of the small mammal that makes one of the most unexpected sounds in the African forest. Those sounds so different from what the animal's appearance would predict that the first-time listener cannot place it. The gorillas do not respond to the hyrax's call. They have heard it every night of their lives, and it carries no threat information and no social information that requires a response. It is part of the background of the night, filed by the sleeping brain as familiar and irrelevant. The population census. The specific method of the mountain gorilla population census, the systematic survey of the Virunga and Bwindi forest areas, using the specific field techniques that the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund and the other conservation organizations have developed over the decades of the monitoring work, involves the trained field teams moving through the forest along predetermined transects and recording the signs of gorilla presence, the nests and the dung and the feeding trails and the direct observations, and using the density of these signs in the surveyed areas to estimate the total population. The most recent census placed the mountain gorilla population at approximately 1,063 in the Virungas and approximately 459 in Bwindi, the combined total of approximately 1,063 representing the most current estimate available. The accuracy of the census is a function of the coverage and the consistency of the survey methodology, and the gorilla census teams that conduct the work in the forest have developed the specific techniques and the specific protocols that the standardized monitoring requires. The field teams are largely composed of rangers from the national parks of Rwanda and Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, trained conservationists from the communities adjacent to the parks whose employment in the conservation work connects their economic interests to the preservation of the gorillas and the forests they inhabit. This connection between the employment of the local communities in the conservation work and the conservation outcomes is one of the specific features of the Mountain Gorilla Conservation Program that the researchers and the conservationists who have studied it point to as one of the primary explanations for the population's recovery. The night is deep and the forest is cold, and the gorillas are sleeping in the mountain darkness. Your breathing is very slow now. The weight is settling through the surface beneath you. The mind is releasing the day's content into the quiet of the approaching sleep. The mountain is above us, and the forest is around us, and the gorillas are in their nests within earshot. The family group that has been together through the specific years of the specific silverback's leadership, and that will move together through the morning as they have moved through every morning, unhurried, eating, the infants playing at the adults' feet, the silverback watching from the slight elevation he always chooses. Sleep now. The gorillas are in the mountain. The night holds everything. Sleep. The gorilla and the human. The gorilla shares approximately 98.3% of its DNA with the human, a closeness that places it alongside the chimpanzee and the bonobo as the human's nearest living relatives, the three species together constituting the closest non-human relatives of the human lineage. The divergence between the gorilla lineage and the lineage that would eventually produce the human occurred approximately 7 to 10 million years ago, a geological moment in the context of the 4 billion year history of life on Earth. What the 7 to 10 million years of separate evolutionary history has produced is, on the one hand, the specific differences that make the gorilla and the human recognizably different animals, and on the other hand, the extraordinary amount of shared biology that the 1.7% of the genome that differs between them has not changed. The shared biology is the shared inheritance of the primate lineage, the common ancestry that reaches back through the great apes to the first primates of the Paleocene, and it expresses itself in the shared basic architecture of the body, the same organs performing the same functions through the same biochemical pathways, the same immune system proteins, the same neurochemical regulators of emotion and motivation and social behavior. The gorilla that experiences fear and curiosity and contentment and the specific social emotions of the family group primate is experiencing those states through the same neurochemical system that the human experiences them through, the same serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin and cortisol circulating through the same type of neural architecture and producing the specific emotional states that the specific contexts require. The gorilla at the zoo. The western lowland gorilla in the well-managed zoological institution is the gorilla that the majority of the humans who have ever encountered a gorilla have encountered, and the quality of that encounter, whether it produces in the human observer the specific recognition of the specific individual in the specific glass-fronted enclosure as a subject of its own experience rather than a spectacle, depends significantly on how the institution has designed the encounter and how it has communicated what the gorilla is. The best zoological institutions have moved their gorilla habitats toward the naturalistic and complex environments that the gorilla's behavioral requirements demand, providing the social groups and the physical complexity and the foraging challenges that allow the gorilla to express its behavioral repertoire rather than the impoverished behavioral expression of the bare concrete enclosure that the older zoo design produced. The silverback in the well-managed contemporary zoo habitat, who spends the morning foraging through the scattered food items that the keepers have hidden in the substrate, who rests in the afternoon in the shade of the planted vegetation, who manages the social dynamics of his group through the specific behaviors of the dominance assertion and the affiliative contact that the gorilla's social life requires, and who engages with the enrichment items the keepers provide with the specific focus of an intelligent animal solving a problem, is showing the visitor something real about what the gorilla is. The visitor who watches for more than a few minutes and who attends to what the specific individual animals are doing and to how they are relating to each other is getting a genuine glimpse of the gorilla's social world, compressed and simplified by the captive context, but not entirely falsified. The Bwindi Forest. The impenetrable forest of Bwindi in southwestern Uganda is the other stronghold of the mountain gorilla. The dense forest reserve that occupies approximately 330 square kilometers of the Albertine Rift's escarpment, and that contains approximately half of the world's remaining mountain gorillas. Bwindi is different from the Virungas in its forest character. Older in evolutionary terms, more diverse biologically, the specific geological and climatic history of the Bwindi area having preserved an exceptional diversity of plant species through the climatic shifts that reduced many of the surrounding forests. The Bwindi gorillas differ slightly in their behavior and their genetics from the Virunga gorillas, the populations having been separated for long enough to develop the modest divergence that geographic isolation always produces over generations. The gorilla trekking that has been developed in both the Virungas and the Bwindi as the primary mechanism for the ecotourism revenue that funds the conservation programs brings small groups of visitors into contact with the habituated gorilla families in the forest under the supervision of the trained rangers and trackers. The habituation process itself, the months or years of patient approach to wild gorilla groups until the animal's fear of humans diminishes enough for the guided visit to be conducted safely for both the humans and the gorillas, is one of the most careful and most demanding forms of wildlife management. The specific behavioral techniques that the habituation requires having been developed through the decades of the field research and the conservation work. The visitor who follows the tracker through the wet forest for 2 or 3 hours and who then finds the gorilla family in the undergrowth 30 meters ahead, who watches the silverback turn and make brief eye contact before returning to his feeding, who watches the infants play at the feet of the resting adults, and who watches the female with her infant on her back move slowly through the vegetation, is having an experience that those who have had it consistently describe as one of the most affecting encounters they have ever had with a non-human animal. The closeness, the calm, the mutual awareness of two very closely related beings in the same ancient forest. The silverback who looks at the visitor and seems to see a primate rather than an alien, the gaze carrying the specific quality of recognition across the 98.3% shared genome, the habitat and the human. The forests that the mountain gorilla inhabits are surrounded by some of the most densely populated agricultural land in Africa. Rwanda has one of the highest population densities of any country on the continent, and the farmland presses right up to the boundary of the Volcanoes National Park on 3 sides. The specific pressure of the human agricultural expansion against the park boundary being one of the primary conservation challenges that the gorilla program manages. The specific families who farm the land adjacent to the park sometimes lose crops to gorillas that leave the park. The conflict between the agricultural community's economic interests and the gorillas' ranging behavior being one of the specific forms of human-wildlife conflict that the conservation program works to reduce through the specific mechanisms of the buffer zone management and the crop damage compensation and the community education programs that the long experience of the program has developed. The families who live on the park boundary have been engaged as partners in the gorilla conservation through programs that share a portion of the park revenue with the local communities. The specific financial link between the gorilla's existence and the community's income being the specific economic mechanism through which the community's interest in the gorilla's survival is maintained and reinforced. The specific ranger corps that patrols the park and monitors the gorilla families includes members from the communities adjacent to the park, the employment of local people in the conservation work, creating the specific personal investment in the gorilla's welfare that the conservation program has found to be one of the most effective factors in reducing the threats to the population. The deep rest of the mountain night. The cold has settled fully into the mountain forest now, and the condensation is falling in the slow drip from the leaf surfaces above, and the gorillas are in their nests in the specific deep rest of the large mammal that has done what it needed to do today, and that is now doing what the night requires. The breath of the silverback rises in the cold air above his ground nest, in the visible way of warm breath in cold air, the specific cloud of moisture dissipating quickly in the dark before the next exhalation produces the next. The infants are so deeply asleep against their mothers that they have the specific quality of the sleeping infant that has completely released every tension from the body, the small hands relaxed and the small faces smooth. This is the peace that the mountain gorilla lives in at the center of the night. Not the peace of the animal that has no threats, because the gorilla has threats, the specific threats of the disease and the habitat pressure, and the poacher who still operates at the margins of the protected area despite the patrol and the monitoring. But the peace of the family gathered in the specific forest that is its home, the silverback present and watchful in the light sleep of the dominant male who never fully surrenders his vigilance. The family intact, the night proceeding as it should. Sleep now. The breathing is as slow as it will be. The weight is fully through the surface. The mind is at the threshold. The mountain is above, and the forest is around, and the gorillas are in their nests in the dark. Sleep. The gorillas are in the mountain. The family is together. The forest is old. The night holds everything. Sleep. The conservation success and what it took. The mountain gorilla is the only great ape whose population has increased in recent decades rather than declined. The specific recovery from approximately 620 individuals in the 1980s to the current 1,000+ representing a conservation achievement that the researchers and the conservationists who work in the Virungas and Bwindi describe as hard-won in the most literal sense. The specific factors that produce the recovery include the intensive anti-poaching work that has reduced the killing of gorillas by hunters to a small fraction of what it was in the decades before the conservation programs reached their current level of operation. The specific veterinary interventions that treat gorilla injuries and illnesses that would previously have been fatal. The specific community programs that have reduced the human-wildlife conflict at the park boundaries, and the specific ecotourism revenue that funds the entire infrastructure of the conservation effort. The anti-poaching work is carried out by the Ranger Corps of the 3 national parks where the mountain gorillas live, the Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda, the Mugahinga Gorilla National Park, and the Bwindi Impenetrable National Park in Uganda, and the Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The rangers patrol the forest daily, removing the wire snares set for other animals that gorillas sometimes stumble into and in which they can lose fingers or hands or die from infection, confronting the armed poachers who still operate in the forest despite the patrols, monitoring the gorilla families through daily contact visits that track the health and the movements of each group. In the DRC, where the Virunga National Park has been the site of active armed conflict for decades, and where rangers have been killed in significant numbers by the armed groups operating in the park, the conservation work has the specific additional dimension of the physical danger to the humans conducting it. The veterinary medicine of the gorilla conservation is a specific field that has developed through the decades of working with habituated gorilla populations, the ability to approach the gorillas closely enough to assess their health and to conduct interventions that wild and unhabituated gorillas would not tolerate, having been the specific outcome of the habituation process that makes the conservation work possible. The specific conditions that the veterinary team treats include the snare injuries that remove digits and hands and feet, the respiratory infections that sweep through gorilla groups in the wet season, the parasitic infestations that weaken individual animals over time, and the occasional injuries from intragroup or intergroup conflicts. The treatment decisions are made carefully, with the specific concern for the specific risk that the human contact introduces in the form of disease transmission, the gorilla's immune system having no specific defenses against many of the respiratory pathogens that the human carries and transmits asymptomatically. The Civil War and the gorilla. The Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo has been the scene of armed conflict periodically since the 1990s. The specific political instability of the eastern DRC, producing the specific violence that has killed hundreds of rangers and that has periodically disrupted the monitoring and the protection of the gorilla families in the park. The gorillas have survived this period of violence better than might have been expected, partly because the armed groups in the park have generally not targeted the gorillas directly, and partly because the specific commitment of the Ranger Corps and the conservation organizations working in the park has maintained some level of the monitoring and the protection even through the worst periods of the conflict. The conservation of the mountain gorilla in the Virunga has been one of the specific examples in the conservation literature of the specific determination that is required to protect wildlife in the specific contexts of the specific political instability and the specific armed conflict that characterizes too many of the landscapes where the most endangered species live. The silverback's tenure. The silverback who leads a mountain gorilla group typically holds that position for years or decades, his tenure ending when he is displaced by a stronger challenger or when age and the accumulated physical wear of his career reduce his capability below the level that the maintenance of his position requires. The specific dynamics of the silverback's tenure, the specific challenges from the outside males who are assessing his fitness, and the specific management of the relationships within the group that maintain the group's cohesion under his leadership, constitute the social environment in which the females and the offspring of the group live their lives. The female's choice of group is one of the most important decisions of her life, the specific silverback she affiliates with, and his specific group determining the specific social environment of her reproductive years and the specific protection available to her offspring. The female who transfers from a group with a failing silverback to a group with a strong young silverback is making the specific reproductive investment decision that the gorilla's reproductive biology is organized around. The specific quality of the male's protection being the specific resource that the female's choice of group is primarily evaluating. The specific cases documented in the long-term studies of females transferring between groups, the specific behavioral sequences of the female leaving one group and affiliating with another, the specific responses of the silverbacks involved, and the specific outcomes for the specific female and her offspring provide the specific empirical evidence for the specific dynamics of the mate choice and the group choice in the mountain gorilla's social system. The decisions are not abstract. They are made by specific animals in specific circumstances, and the outcomes determine whether specific offspring survive and whether specific genetic lineages continue. The gorilla and the forest's health. The gorilla is not only the animal that lives in the Central African forest. It is one of the animals that maintains the forest's health, the specific ecological function of the seed dispersal that the gorilla performs as it moves through the home range eating fruit and depositing the seeds in its dung at distances from the parent trees that allow the seedlings to germinate without competing directly with the parent for light and nutrients. The large body of the gorilla allows it to swallow seeds that smaller animals cannot process, and the specific seeds that pass through the gorilla's gut intact are the seeds of the specific trees whose regeneration depends on the gorilla for their dispersal, the same mutual dependency between the large-bodied frugivore and the large-seeded tree that the spider monkey's story illustrates in the near-tropical context. The removal of the gorilla from the Central African forest would change the forest over generations in ways that accumulate slowly and that become visible only when you compare the regeneration in the gorilla-present forest with the regeneration in the gorilla-absent forest, the specific composition of the tree species in the understory, and the specific diversity of the plant community reflecting the specific dispersal history that the specific animals have produced over the specific generations of their presence in the specific forest. The gorilla is not just in the forest. The gorilla is part of what makes the forest what it is, the night that is almost over. The mountain forest is beginning the specific transition from the deepest dark of the pre-dawn to the first gray that signals the approaching light, not yet visible as light, but present as the specific, slightly reduced darkness that the experienced eye detects in the east above the forest canopy. The gorillas will begin to stir before the light fully reaches the forest floor, the silverback the first to wake and to move. Sitting up in his nest and looking around the area with the alert attention of the dominant male, who has never fully released his vigilance through the night, and who is now returning to full consciousness and the full awareness of the day's responsibilities. The infants will be the last to fully wake, clinging to the mothers through the transition from sleep to wakefulness in the specific way of the dependent young, that has no reason to move quickly because the mother is still there and the day can wait. The specific morning sounds of the mountain gorilla family waking, the soft vocalizations and the movement through the nest vegetation, and the first movements of the juveniles toward the play that will occupy them through the morning, are the specific sounds of the gorilla family beginning another day in the specific forest in the specific mountain that is their home. Your breathing is still slow. The sleep that has been approaching through the hours of this conversation is very close. The mountain is above and the forest is around, and the gorillas are there in the dark, beginning the transition from the night's rest to the day's activity. Sleep. The gorillas are in the mountain. The night is ending. The family will wake with the light, but now is still the dark. Sleep. The silverback is there. The forest holds everything. Sleep. The gorillas play. The play of the juvenile gorilla is the most immediately endearing behavior the species produces. The young animal's mock charges, and the wrestling with the other juveniles, and the tree climbing and the somersaulting, and the specific game of pestering the resting adults until one of them responds with a gentle swat or a rumble of mild annoyance, constituting the daily activity of the juvenile that is developing every capability it will need as an adult. The silverback, who tolerates the juvenile's rough play against his own large body, the young animal using the massive adult as a climbing frame or a wrestling partner, is demonstrating the specific patience that characterizes the dominant male's relationship with the offspring of his group, the silverback, who is the primary playmate and protector for the juveniles, whose mothers are occupied with younger infants. The play of the gorilla has the quality of intrinsic joy, the behavior produced not for any resource or reward, but for the experience of the playing itself, the engagement with the world and with the other members of the social group through the physical and social medium of the play. The researcher who has watched a specific group of juvenile gorillas playing for an afternoon, and who has seen the play faces and the play behaviors and the social negotiations of the game between specific known individuals, describes the experience not as the observation of behavioral data points, but as the watching of people having fun. The word applies. The specific cognitive requirements of the play, the planning of the specific game structure, and the negotiation of the rules between the players, and the adjustment of the play behavior to the specific capabilities of the specific play partner, are the cognitive requirements that the great ape's social intelligence is most directly designed to meet. The gorilla juvenile, who calibrates its play behavior to the size and the age and the current mood of the specific play partner, who adjusts the roughness of the wrestling and the intensity of the mock charge to the specific capacities of the specific individual it is playing with, is demonstrating the same theory of mind capability that the chimpanzee and the orangutan and the human demonstrate in the equivalent contexts, the understanding of the other's perspective and capabilities and current state that the effective social interaction requires. The specific social learning of the juvenile gorilla takes place not in the formal context of the adult instruction, but in the informal context of the daily observation of the adult's behavior and the gradual participation in the group's activities. The juvenile that watches the experienced forager strip the Galium vine and then attempts the same stripping motion with its own piece of vine, getting it wrong at first and improving through repetition and observation, is acquiring the specific foraging knowledge that the adult's competence represents through the specific social learning mechanism that the primate order has refined over 65 million years of the arboreal social life. The knowledge is not transmitted directly. It is acquired through the specific combination of the watching and the doing and the adjusting that constitutes the primate's primary mode of learning the skills that the adult life requires. The vocalization of the silverback's long call. In the early morning, before the family has moved far from the night's nesting site, the silverback sometimes produces the long call, a series of vocalizations that builds from soft hoots through progressively louder sounds to the culminating series of calls and ending in a long rumble, the sequence lasting up to a minute and carrying through the forest for distances that allow the neighboring groups to locate this group's position. The long call is the acoustic equivalent of the scent mark, the communication of presence and position to the other gorillas in the home range area, the information that allows the neighboring groups to manage their spatial relationships and their avoidance of direct confrontation while maintaining the specific awareness of where each group is that the territorial organization of the forest requires, the specific parameters of the long call, the specific acoustic structure that differs between individuals in ways that allow gorillas to identify the specific caller, provide the neighboring groups not just with the location of the calling group, but with the identity of the silverback who leads it, the specific assessment information that the competing male's territorial management requires. The young silverback who hears the long call of the older established silverback in the adjacent range and who assesses the specific acoustic parameters of the call to estimate the caller's size and condition is doing the specific long-range assessment of the competition that the maintenance of the territorial system requires, making the specific decision about whether to approach or to avoid based on the specific information that the specific acoustic signal carries. The gorilla and the rain. In the Virungas and Bwindi, rain is frequent and sometimes heavy, the equatorial mountains catching the moisture from the Congo basin in ways that produce daily precipitation patterns and the specific dramatic storms of the wet season that can persist for hours. The gorilla's response to the rain is the specific behavioral expression of an animal that dislikes being wet, but that lacks the shelter that the human's technology provides. The gorillas typically sit huddled with their backs to the rain, their heads bowed, waiting for the downpour to end with the specific patience of the animal that has no option but to wait and for whom waiting is a practiced behavior. The silverback during a heavy rain is the specific image of large and powerful immobility. The enormous animal sitting completely still with the water running through his silver saddle and off his brow ridges and dripping from his hands. The patience of the mountain gorilla in the mountain rain, being one of the specific images of the species that the researchers and the trackers who have spent years in the Virunga forest return to as the one that most captures the gorilla's specific quality of equanimity. The rain is not a problem to be solved. The rain is a condition to be endured. The gorilla endures it without apparent distress, waiting for the condition to change. The mountain itself. The Virunga Mountains are the specific geological formation of the Central African Rift System, the chain of 8 volcanoes that stretches across the borders of Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The specific mix of the active volcanoes and the dormant ones, producing the specific landscape of the lava flows, and the craters and the high-altitude forests that the mountain gorilla has been inhabiting since the species came into being, in something close to its current form. The highest of the Virungas, Mount Karisimbi at 4,507 meters, is above the zone of continuous forest and carries the specific alpine landscape of the high altitude, above 3,000 meters. But the gorilla's range extends from the lower forest edges up to approximately 3,500 meters. The temperature and the vegetation type at the upper end of the range being the specific cold mossy forest that the researchers describe as the most atmospherically compelling of the gorilla habitats. The volcanic soil of the Virungas is extraordinarily fertile. the specific mineral richness of the basaltic lava decomposing into the soil that supports the specific dense vegetation of the high-altitude forest that the gorilla's diet depends on. The galium vine grows in the rich soil in the profusion that the gorilla's bulk requires. The thistles and the nettles and the wild celery and the bamboo of the lower elevations, providing the caloric base that the large body's daily maintenance demands. The mountain is, in the specific ecological sense, a magnificent food resource for an animal adapted to exploit it. The fertility of the volcanic soil, expressing itself in the specific abundance of the specific plants that the specific animal has been eating for the specific duration of the gorilla lineage's presence in these specific mountains. Sleep now. The mountain is dark and the forest is dark and the gorillas are in their nests in the specific cold of the high-altitude equatorial night, and the breathing has reached the rhythm of the deepest rest. The mind is quiet. The weight is settled. The silverback is there in the dark above us, his broad back silver against the night, his slow breathing the breathing of the largest primate on earth at its most peaceful. Sleep. The gorillas are in the mountain. The family is together. The forest is old. The night holds everything. The silverback breathes slowly. Sleep. The morning will come with the light. But now is this. The dark. The quiet. The cold forest and the sleeping family. Sleep. The gorilla at the boundary of two worlds. There is a specific moment in the gorilla encounter, described by nearly every researcher who has experienced it, when the silverback turns from what he was doing and looks directly at the human observer, and the eye contact is held for a second or two before he looks away. That moment is described consistently as one of the most affecting experiences of any encounter with a non-human animal, not because the silverback does anything dramatic, but because of the quality of what passes in the eye contact, the specific sense of mutual recognition between two animals that share 98.3% of their genome and whose common ancestor was alive not very long ago in evolutionary time. The silverback does not see an alien. He sees something familiar enough to assess, to categorize, to decide is not a threat, and to return his attention to the things that actually require his attention, which are his family and his forest. That look, that brief mutual recognition across the boundary between the human world and the gorilla world, is what the decades of the habituation work and the conservation programs and the careful management of the gorilla trekking program have made possible, the specific access to the specific animal in the specific forest that the specific human effort has preserved. Without the conservation work, the mountain gorilla would in all probability be extinct or functionally extinct by now. The population trajectory of the 1980s pointing unmistakably in that direction. With the conservation work, the population has grown, and the animal is there in the forest, and the encounter is possible, and the specific look that passes between the silverback and the human observer when their eyes meet is the specific reward that the specific effort has made available. The gorilla in the culture. The gorilla entered the Western cultural imagination initially through the accounts of the explorers and the hunters who encountered the Western lowland gorilla in the forests of West Africa in the 19th century, and the first accounts described an animal of extraordinary ferocity, the aggressive charge, and the chest beat that the explorers witnessed being interpreted as the behavior of an animal that was attacking rather than warning, the specific misreading of the gorilla's behavior, producing the specific myth of the gorilla as a savage and dangerous monster that persisted in the popular imagination for decades and that informed the specific cultural productions, the adventure stories and the films and the popular science writing that shaped the general public's understanding of the animal. King Kong, the specific cultural production that has most completely defined the gorilla's image in the 20th century popular imagination, is the extreme expression of the specific mythologized gorilla, the enormous ape whose specific combination of the physical power and the apparent emotional depth and the specific tragic end has made the story one of the most durable in the popular culture of the past century. The specific resonance of King Kong is partly the resonance of the specific cultural myth of the wild and the civilized in conflict, the specific untamable nature forced into the specific human context and destroyed by the specific encounter. But it is also partly the resonance of the specific recognition that the specific creature at the center of the story is not entirely other, that the specific emotions attributed to the specific fictional gorilla have a specific plausibility that the audience responds to because the 98.3% of shared genome is not entirely invisible in the way the animal moves and responds and suffers. The specific revision of the gorilla's cultural image that Dian Fossey's research produced, the specific portrait of the mountain gorilla as the gentle giant rather than the savage monster, the specific individual animals with their specific names and their specific social lives and their specific vulnerabilities to the specific human threats of the poaching and the habitat loss, was one of the more significant revisions of a cultural myth that the natural history writing of the 20th century produced. The title of her book, Gorillas in the Mist, has become as much a part of the cultural language around the gorilla as King Kong, the specific phrase carrying the specific atmospheric quality of the specific animal in the specific landscape that the specific research produced. Your sleep is very nearly complete now. The breathing is at its minimum. The weight of the body is fully given over. The mind is releasing the last threads of the waking world. The mountain is dark and cold and the gorillas are in their nests, and the forest holds them in the same way it has held them through every night of the specific history of the mountain gorilla in these specific mountains, which is to say for a very long time. The silverback is breathing in his ground nest. The infants are against their mothers. The forest drips, sleep. The gorillas are in the mountain. The family is together. The night holds everything. The silverback is there, sleep. The morning will bring the light and the foraging and the play of the juveniles and the long call at dawn. But now is the dark, sleep. The gorillas are in the mountain. The night holds everything, sleep. The gorilla's relationship with water. Mountain gorillas dislike crossing water. Unlike the orangutan that wades rivers or the proboscis monkey that swims between mangrove islands, the mountain gorilla avoids bodies of water and will choose a considerable detour to avoid crossing even a shallow stream when the crossing is not necessary. The researchers who have followed gorilla groups through the high-altitude forest have documented the specific behavioral strategies the animals use to navigate the watercourses in their home range, the use of fallen logs as bridges, and the stepping stone approach to the wider crossings, and the specific routes through the landscape that minimize the number of water crossings required. Whether this is a deeply ingrained behavioral tendency or the accumulation of learned caution is not entirely clear, but the consistency of the behavior across populations and individuals suggests something more fundamental than individual preference. The irony of the water aversion is that the mountain gorilla lives in one of the wettest environments on the continent, the high-altitude forests of the Virungas and Bwindi receiving precipitation for most of the year and maintaining the specific saturated quality of the moss forest, where the moisture level makes everything permanently damp. The gorilla that moves through this wet forest is wet much of the time, regardless of its efforts to avoid standing water. The aversion is specific to the crossing of streams and pools rather than to contact with the ambient moisture of the forest. The distinction may reflect the specific history of the mountain gorilla's evolution in the specific forest, where the streams present different risks than the ambient moisture. The poaching history and the anti-poaching work. The gorilla has been targeted by poachers throughout the 20th century for multiple purposes, the specific motivation varying by period and by the specific demand that the specific period's specific markets created. In the earlier decades of the 20th century, the gorilla was hunted by collectors for zoological institutions and for the trophy trade, the specific body parts of the specific animal having the specific value in the specific markets that the specific demand created. Later, the gorilla became the target of the bushmeat trade, the specific protein value of the large-bodied primate, making it a valuable commodity in the urban markets of the Congo Basin cities. Most tragically, gorillas have been killed as incidental casualties of the wire snares set for antelope and other animals, the gorilla stumbling into the snare and being unable to free itself, the injury sometimes fatal, and sometimes producing the specific loss of the hand or the foot that the snare removes before the animal frees itself. The anti-poaching work of the Ranger Corps has reduced these threats dramatically in the areas of most intensive patrol. But the work is never finished, and the threats are never entirely eliminated. The specific commitment of the rangers who patrol the park boundaries and the interior often in conditions that are physically demanding and sometimes genuinely dangerous, is the specific human contribution to the gorilla's survival that the conservation programs depend on most directly. The rangers who have given years or decades of their working lives to the patrol of the Virunga and Bwindi forests, who have removed thousands of snares, and who have engaged the poachers who set them, and who have maintained the daily monitoring of the gorilla families through the specific difficulties of the specific field conditions, are the people whose specific labor has been the specific mechanism through which the gorilla's survival has been maintained. The gorilla's social grooming. Among the affiliative behaviors that maintain the social bonds of the gorilla group, the mutual grooming is one of the most visible and the most studied, the specific time investment of the gorilla's day that goes to the maintenance of the social relationships through the physical medium of the grooming contact. The grooming in the gorilla is less elaborate and less frequent than the grooming in the chimpanzee, reflecting the gorilla's smaller group size and the different social structure of the family group, compared to the chimpanzee's multi-male community, but it is present, and it serves the same bond maintenance function that it serves in all the primate species that practice it. The silverback receives grooming from the females of his group, the specific act of the grooming contact being the specific expression of the female's affiliative investment in the relationship with the dominant male, and he reciprocates with the tolerance and the protection that the social contract of the gorilla family provides. The grooming between the females of the group, particularly between the females who have been together in the same group for the longest periods, reflects the specific bonds that the shared years of group life have built between those specific individuals. The grooming sessions between the long-established females having a quality of ease and familiarity that the observer reading the body language of the participants can distinguish from the more tentative grooming of the recently transferred female, who is still building her position in the group. The night of the mountain is its own thing. Different from the night of the savanna, or the night of the lowland forest, or the night of the temperate woodland, the mountain forest night has the specific qualities of the high altitude combined with the specific qualities of the equatorial latitude, the specific cold and the specific completeness of the darkness, and the specific sounds of the high altitude forest at night, that together constitute the acoustic and thermal and atmospheric environment in which the gorilla has been sleeping for the duration of its evolutionary history in these mountains. The cold is real, dropping sometimes below 5 degrees Celsius at the highest elevations of the gorilla's range, and the gorilla manages it through the nest and the body contact with the family, and the specific physiological thermoregulation of the large warm-blooded mammal that generates more heat per unit surface area than the smaller bodies of the other inhabitants of the same forest. The specific quality of the night in the Virunga forest, the specific moss that covers every surface and that absorbs and releases moisture through the hours of the darkness, the specific tree forms of the Haginia and the giant heathers that give the high-altitude forest its specific character, the specific complete darkness that the closed canopy creates when no moon is visible, constitute the specific environment in which the gorilla's biology has been shaped across the generations of its presence in these mountains. The gorilla knows this forest in the way that the animal knows its home, not through the abstract representation of the ecology, but through the accumulated sensory familiarity of the specific individual's specific years of ranging in the specific home range. Every tree and every waterway and every food patch known through the specific experience of having been there before. Sleep now. The mountain is dark and cold. The gorillas are in their nests. The forest drips. The silverback breathes slowly in his ground nest, and the infants are against their mothers, and the forest holds all of them in the specific way that the ancient mountain forest holds the animals that belong to it. Sleep. The gorillas are in the mountain. The night holds everything, sleep. The light will come with the morning. The family will move through the forest. The long call will carry to the neighboring groups. But now is the dark. Now is the rest. Sleep. The gorillas are there. The mountain holds them. The night holds everything. Sleep. The gorillas are there as they were last night, in the nests they built in the dusk, and in which they have been sleeping through the cold hours of the mountain night. The Virunga forest is dark, and the Bwindi is dark, and the approximately 1,100 mountain gorillas alive on Earth are distributed between these two landscapes in the family groups that their specific silverbacks lead, sleeping the deep sleep of the large-bodied herbivore that has eaten well and that has no genuine predator to fear in the forests where it lives. We came here last night and learned about the family structure and the silverback's role and the Dian Fossey research and the conservation recovery. Tonight we go deeper into the gorilla's world, into the cognitive life and the social complexity and the specific landscapes where the gorillas live and the specific human relationships that the conservation of the species has produced. Find your position. Let the surface beneath you take the full weight. The breathing is already slowing. The mountain is above us in the imagination, and the forest is around us, and the gorillas are in their nests nearby, present and quiet in the way of large animals at rest. The gorilla's mind, the cognitive capabilities of the gorilla, have been studied through a combination of the captive research, primarily with western lowland gorillas in zoological institutions, and the wild observations of the behavioral ecology research in the Virungas and Bwindi. The picture that has emerged from these two streams of evidence is of an animal whose cognitive capabilities are comparable to those of the other great apes in the domains of social intelligence and problem-solving and planning, and whose specific cognitive style is, in the view of many of the researchers who have worked with it most closely, characterized by a kind of deliberateness, thoughtful engagement with the world that reflects the temperament of an animal, whose large body and whose folivorous diet have freed it from the urgent foraging pressure that drives the faster-paced cognitive style of the chimpanzee. The gorilla's problem-solving in captive studies shows the same general capabilities that the chimpanzee and the orangutan demonstrate: the understanding of causal relationships between objects and between actions and their consequences, the use of tools when the context provides the specific challenge that a tool can address, the planning of sequences of actions toward a specific goal. The gorilla's specific performance on the mirror test, the self-recognition paradigm that has been used as a behavioral marker of self-awareness across the great apes, has been documented in multiple western lowland gorillas. The specific behavior of the gorilla using the mirror to examine specific parts of its own face and body that it cannot see, directly confirming the self-concept that the test is designed to detect. The gorilla's language research. Alongside Coco, whose work with Francine Patterson we touched on last night, there was Michael, a western lowland gorilla, who also learned American Sign Language and who produced, in an interaction that has been discussed extensively in the literature on gorilla cognition, a series of signs that were interpreted by Patterson as a description of an event from his early life: the killing of his mother by poachers in the wild, the specific content of the apparent description being not an abstract concept, but a specific autobiographic memory rendered in signs. Whether this constitutes the first instance of a non-human animal describing a traumatic memory from its past through a symbolic communication system is debated in the literature with the same intensity that all the great ape language research has been debated. What is not debated is the remarkable quality of what Michael produced, whatever its ultimate cognitive interpretation: the emotional life of the gorilla. The evidence for the gorilla's emotional life comes primarily from the decades of observation of the specific individuals of the specific study groups in the specific field sites, the behavioral patterns of the specific animals in the specific contexts, providing the specific evidence that the specific emotions that the specific behaviors express are real states that the gorilla experiences rather than behavioral outputs without accompanying subjective experience. The gorilla that shows the specific behavioral indicators of grief after the loss of a family member, the reduced activity and the reduced appetite, and the specific social withdrawal that the long-term observation of bereaved gorillas has documented, is showing the behavioral pattern that the grief produces in the social animal that has lost a close social partner. The specific case of the western lowland gorilla Ghana, who was observed at the Münster Zoo in Germany in 2008, carrying the body of her dead infant for days, presenting it to the veterinary staff and the visitors in the apparent attempt to elicit the response that would have come had the infant been alive, produced an international response that demonstrated something about the public's recognition of the gorilla's emotional life that the scientific debate sometimes obscures. The behavior was not interpretable as simply mechanical persistence. It had the quality of the refusal to accept the loss that the grief response in highly social mammals sometimes produces, the mother's behavior in the days after the infant's death being the behavioral expression of the social bond's continuation beyond the partner's death. The gorilla of Rwanda and the mountain people. The relationship between the mountain gorilla and the communities that live adjacent to the Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda is one of the most extensively studied examples of the human-wildlife interface in the conservation literature. The specific cultural and economic and political dimensions of the relationship having been analyzed by anthropologists and conservationists and development economists alongside the biologists who study the gorillas themselves. The Rwandan communities adjacent to the park are among the most densely settled in Africa, and the park boundary represents the specific line between the agricultural land that the farmers depend on and the forest that the gorillas inhabit, a boundary that is maintained by a combination of the legal authority of the national park and the economic interest of the communities who benefit from the gorilla tourism. The specific revenue-sharing arrangement that the Rwanda Development Board has established distributes a portion of the gorilla trekking permit fees to the communities in the buffer zone around the park. The specific financial connection between the gorilla's continued existence and the community's income being the specific mechanism through which the community's interest in the gorilla's survival is maintained. The visitors who pay the substantial permit fee for the gorilla trek are contributing not only to the park's operating budget, but to the community development fund that builds schools and health centers and water systems in the villages adjacent to the park. The specific development investment being the specific community's specific benefit from the specific existence of the specific gorilla in the specific forest that the specific park protects. The tracker and the silverback. The trackers who work with the gorilla trekking program in the Virungas and Bwindi are typically people from the communities adjacent to the parks who have been trained in the specific skills of the gorilla tracking over years of field experience. The specific knowledge of the specific gorilla family groups, their home ranges and their typical movement patterns, and the specific behavioral characteristics of the specific silverbacks is knowledge that the experienced tracker carries through the years of daily contact visits to the habituated groups. The tracker, who has been following the same family group for 10 or 15 years, knows the specific animals in the specific way that the long familiarity always produces. The specific individuals recognizable by the specific features of the face and the specific patterns of the behavior that the years of daily observation have made as familiar as the faces of the colleagues and the neighbors of the daily life. The relationship between the tracker and the specific gorilla group is not the relationship of the scientist and the study subject alone. It has the quality of the long familiarity that any sustained relationship between an attentive human and a specific group of intelligent animals produces, the specific recognition of the specific individuals and the specific concern for their specific well-being, that the tracker who has been following the same group for years feels for the animals he monitors. When a gorilla is injured or sick, the tracker who has been following that individual for years experiences the specific concern for the specific individual that the long familiarity produces, and the specific relief when the animal recovers is real. The western lowland gorilla in the Congo. The forests of the Congo Basin that the western lowland gorilla inhabits are among the most remote and the least accessible of the gorilla's range habitats. The vast lowland forests that stretch across the Republic of Congo and Gabon and Cameroon and the Central African Republic being among the largest continuous blocks of tropical forest remaining on Earth. The western lowland gorilla in these forests lives in smaller family groups than the mountain gorilla, the specific social organization reflecting the specific ecological conditions of the specific forest, and ranges through the specific home range in the specific daily movement pattern that the fruiting trees and the other food resources of the lowland forest dictate. The specific study of the western lowland gorilla in the wild was difficult for decades. The combination of the dense forest and the extreme shyness of the unhabituated gorilla, making the behavioral observations that the mountain gorilla's habituation has made routine impossible to conduct in the lowland forest at any comparable level. The Mbeli Bai study site in the Republic of Congo, where the western lowland gorillas have been observed at a forest clearing where multiple groups come to eat the aquatic vegetation, has provided a specific window into the social life of the lowland gorilla that the forest observation alone cannot provide. The specific observation of the specific interactions between the specific individuals of the specific groups at the Bai, producing the specific behavioral data that has expanded the understanding of the lowland gorilla's social world. The specific discovery at the Bai sites is that the western lowland gorilla engages in the specific social interactions between groups that the mountain gorilla's territorial organization makes less common. The specific brief associations at the food resource, bringing the specific individuals of the specific different groups into proximity and into the specific social negotiations that the shared resource requires. The specific silverbacks of the specific different groups assess each other at a distance. The specific chest beat displays and the specific long calls serving the same function they serve in the mountain gorilla's intergroup encounters, communicating the specific capabilities of the specific individuals and allowing the specific dominance negotiations that determine the specific access to the specific resource without requiring the specific physical confrontations that the specific display system is designed to make unnecessary. The night in the forest and its sounds. The mountain gorilla's night is not silent. The forest itself produces sounds through the hours of the darkness. The specific creaking of the large trees in the wind and the occasional collapse of the dead wood that the decay has weakened, and the specific sounds of the smaller nocturnal animals moving through the undergrowth below the nesting gorillas. The tree hyrax produces its extraordinary call at intervals, the sound carrying through the forest in the way of the territorial advertisement of the small mammal, whose large vocal production relative to its body size has always surprised the first-time listener in the African forest. The gorillas respond to some of these sounds, and not to others, the experienced animal having learned through the years of living in this forest which sounds require the alerting response and which are familiar enough to ignore in the sleep. The specific threshold between the familiar and the unfamiliar, between the sounds that belong to the normal night and the sounds that require the attention, is learned through the accumulation of experience in the specific forest. The specific knowledge of the specific acoustic landscape of the home range that the specific years of ranging in that landscape produce. The morning that approaches. In the hours before the dawn, the forest undergoes the specific transition from the deepest darkness to the first grey that the approaching light produces in the sky above the canopy. The gorillas begin to stir before the light fully reaches the forest floor. The silverback the first to wake, sitting up in the ground nest and looking around the area, with the attention of the dominant male who has never entirely released his vigilance through the night. The small sounds of the family waking, the movement through the nest vegetation, and the soft vocalizations of the waking infants and the first play behaviors of the juveniles, who are always the quickest to transition from sleep to full activity, fill the forest around the nesting site. The first movement of the morning is often toward the water, the gorillas moving to drink from the streams in the home range before the day's foraging begins in earnest. The silverback leads, or the movement accumulates in the direction that the group's various motivations collectively establish. And the family moves through the specific morning forest in the specific single file or spread out pattern that the specific terrain and the specific vegetation density of the specific area produce. The specific sounds of the movement, the knuckle walking on the forest floor and the bent branches and the occasional vocalization, are the sounds of the gorilla family beginning another day in the forest that is their home. Breathe slowly. The night is very nearly done. The sleep that has been approaching through the hours of this conversation is at the threshold, the breathing slow and the body fully settled, and the mind in the quiet place that is the last awareness before the deep rest takes hold. The gorillas are in their nests above us in the mountain forest, and the silverback is beginning to stir, and the infants are still against their mothers, and the forest is beginning the transition from the night to the day. The gorilla's world is not fragile. It has survived through the pressures of the 20th century that reduced the mountain gorilla population to 600 individuals, and it has grown back toward 1,000. and the trajectory is upward in ways that the careful conservation work has earned. The forest that holds them is old and deep and capable of holding them for as long as the decisions that protect it continue to be made. The mountain is patient. The gorilla is patient. The night is patient. Sleep now. The gorillas are in the mountain. The family is together. The silverback breathes slowly in his nest. The infants are against their mothers. The forest holds everything. The night holds everything. Sleep. The morning is coming. The long call will carry through the forest. The family will move through the day. But now is the last dark. Sleep. The gorillas are there. The mountain holds them. The night holds everything. Sleep. The silverback's relationship with the infants. Among the behavioral observations that have most consistently surprised the researchers who came to the gorilla work, with expectations shaped by the popular image of the intimidating mountain gorilla, the silverback's relationship with the infants of his group ranks near the top. The silverback is not simply the enforcer of the group's hierarchy and the protector against external threats. He is the primary social companion of the infants and the juveniles, whose mothers are occupied with younger offspring, the large patient animal who tolerates the climbing and the play pestering, and the general disruption that the young gorillas direct toward him with a patience that the observer can only describe as parental. The infant gorilla whose mother has a new baby, and who has therefore lost access to the immediate proximity, and the nursing that occupied its first years, will often seek out the silverback as an alternative social partner, affiliating with the dominant male in ways that provide the physical contact and the reassurance of proximity that the developmental stage requires. The silverback's tolerance of this affiliation, his acceptance of the demanding young animal as a companion in ways that impose genuine costs on his time and his rest, is the behavioral expression of the specific investment in the group's offspring that the mountain gorilla silverback makes as a function of his social role. The specific cases documented in the long-term field studies of orphaned infants being adopted by the silverback, the young animals whose mothers died from injury or illness being taken under the direct care of the dominant male who carried them and slept with them and protected them in the specific way the mother would have done, are the cases that most completely demonstrate the gorilla's social intelligence and the gorilla's capacity for the specific kind of social investment that goes beyond the immediately obvious reproductive calculus. The silverback who adopts the orphaned infant is not maximizing his immediate reproductive output. He is maintaining the social structure of his group and the welfare of its members in the way that the intelligent social primate with the long tenure of a stable group always maintains the social fabric. The gorilla's diet through the seasons. The mountain gorilla's foraging year is organized around the specific availability of the specific food plants through the specific seasons of the high-altitude forest's annual cycle. The bamboo shoots that emerge in the lower elevation areas of the gorilla's range in the specific season of the bamboo growth are a gorilla delicacy. The high-protein young shoots sought out and consumed in quantity during the specific weeks of their availability before the shoots harden and become less palatable. The movement of the gorilla groups to the bamboo areas during the bamboo season is one of the predictable seasonal movements that the long-term studies have documented. The specific timing and the specific duration of the bamboo exploitation, reflecting the specific phenological pattern of the specific bamboo species in the specific elevational range that the specific study population inhabits. Outside the bamboo season, the diet is the general foliage diet of the mountain gorilla. The galium vine and the thistles and the nettles and the wild celery and the bark of specific tree species, providing the bulk of the daily food intake. The gorilla moves slowly through the home range, from food patch to food patch, eating as it moves the approximately 30 kilograms of vegetation that the large body requires each day, consumed through the steady browsing that occupies a third or more of the waking hours. The knowledge of the home range's food distribution, the specific locations of the specific plants in the specific seasons, is the specific ecological knowledge that the silverback carries through the years of his tenure of the territory, guiding the group's movement toward the productive areas with the accumulated experience of the long familiarity, the gorilla and the other forest inhabitants. The mountain gorilla shares its forest with a diverse community of other animals, from the golden monkey that occupies the bamboo zones to the bushbuck and the forest buffalo that range through the lower forest edges to the specific birds and the small mammals of the high-altitude forest that the gorilla moves through without particular interaction. The gorilla is not a predator, and the other animals of its forest do not respond to it as a predator. The herbivorous large animal moving through the community without the specific threat response that the predator's presence produces. The buffalo and the gorilla occasionally encounter each other in the forest and typically move in opposite directions. The mutual assessment of the large animals, resolving quickly into the avoidance that both species prefer. The golden monkey of the Virungas, the specific endemic primate of the bamboo forest, whose range overlaps with the gorilla's range in the bamboo zone, sometimes moves in proximity to the gorilla groups without apparent concern. The two primate species, sharing the bamboo resource at different times or in different sections of the bamboo stands, without the aggressive competition that the shared food resource might produce. The researcher who has observed both species in the same forest area describes the coexistence as unremarkable, neither species showing particular awareness of or interest in the other. The specific ecological differentiation of their diets and their microhabitats, reducing the direct competition between them. The role of international conservation organizations. Alongside the government parks authorities of Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, several international conservation organizations have been central to the mountain gorilla's recovery. The Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund, established in Fossey's memory after her murder in 1985, has maintained continuous presence in the Virungas through the decades since, conducting the long-term research and supporting the ranger operations and the community programs that the conservation requires. The International Gorilla Conservation Program, a coalition that has brought together multiple organizations working in the gorilla range, has provided the coordination between the different national and international actors that the transboundary nature of the gorilla's range demands. The specific funding that supports the conservation work comes from multiple sources, including the gorilla tourism revenue, the government budgets of the range countries, the donations from international conservation organizations and from private donors, and the grants from foundations and bilateral aid programs. The specific challenge of maintaining adequate and consistent funding for a long-term conservation program in 3 countries with very different governance situations and very different levels of political stability has been one of the consistent challenges of the mountain gorilla conservation. The periods of armed conflict in the eastern DRC in particular having disrupted the funding and the programming in the Virunga National Park on multiple occasions. The gorilla at dusk, the specific quality of the mountain gorilla group in the hour before the night, the hour when the animals are building their nests and when the social interactions of the day are concluding and the family is gathering for the night, is one of the specific times that the field researchers describe as the most rewarding to observe. The nest building itself, the deliberate and practiced movement through the vegetation that produces the sleeping platform in 3 to 5 minutes, gives each individual the specific period of focused physical activity before the rest. The gorilla that bends the branches and arranges the vegetation moving with the efficiency of the expert builder who has been building the same structure in the same way every evening of its adult life. The social interactions of the pre-nest period, the grooming and the play and the specific vocalizations of the family settling for the night, have the quality of the end of the day's business, the specific resolution of the day's social events before the quiet of the night. The infants who have been playing through the afternoon are brought to the mother's side as the light fails, the specific physical gathering of the family for the night, producing the specific arrangement of the bodies that will persist through the cold hours until the morning. The patience of the mountain gorilla is one of the qualities that the researchers who have spent the most time with the species return to most consistently when asked to describe what the gorilla is. Not the patience of the animal that is waiting for something to happen, but the patience of the animal that is fully present in the moment it occupies, attending to the things that the moment contains without the specific restlessness that characterizes many of the other primate species. The gorilla resting in the afternoon, the large body arranged comfortably against the tree trunk, the eyes sometimes closed and sometimes partially open in the specific state of the animal, that is not quite asleep and not fully alert, but occupying the specific, comfortable, intermediate state that the well-fed and secure animal inhabits, has a quality of settledness that the observer watching from a distance finds immediately affecting. The specific quality of the gorilla's calm is not the absence of awareness. The silverback, who appears to be dozing in the afternoon shade, is tracking everything in the perceptual field, the sounds and the movements of the group members and the surrounding forest registering in the specific way of the dominant male whose vigilance never fully lapses. The gorilla's calm is the calm of the competent animal in its own domain. The animal that has what it needs and that knows its world well enough to occupy it without the anxiety of the unfamiliar or the insecurity of the inadequate. The specific sound of the mountain forest before the dawn. In the hour before the light reaches the forest floor, the specific sounds of the high-altitude forest produce the specific acoustic environment of the mountain night ending and the day beginning. The specific calls of the birds that inhabit the montane forest, different from the lowland forest's bird community, begin before the light, the specific early singers of the specific ecosystem producing the first sounds of the transition from the night to the day that the experienced listener in the forest recognizes as the signal of the approaching dawn. The condensation drips from the moss and the leaves in the continuing random pattern of the night, the sound unchanged from midnight to the specific quality of the pre-dawn drip that is still indistinguishable from the midnight drip. The gorillas stir before the light reaches them, the silverback's movement and his soft vocalization beginning the day's social activity before the forest is fully illuminated. The family that has been gathered in the nests through the night begins the specific dispersal of the morning, the individuals moving from the sleeping positions to the feeding positions in the gradual way of the primate group waking together after the shared night. Your sleep is here. The specific weight of the body is as fully given over to the surface beneath it as it will be. The specific breathing is as slow as the waking state allows. At the threshold, the mountain is above and the forest is around, and the gorillas are in their nests in the specific dark of the specific mountain night, and the morning that will bring the long call and the day's foraging and the play of the juveniles and the slow movement through the ancient forest is a few hours away. Sleep now. The gorillas are in the mountain. The night holds everything. The silverback breathes slowly. The infants are against their mothers. The family is together in the dark. Sleep. The morning will come. The light will reach the forest. The family will move through the day. But now is the last dark. Sleep. The gorillas are there. The mountain holds them. The forest is old. The night holds everything. Sleep. The female gorilla's social life. The female mountain gorilla's experience of the social world is organized differently from the silverback's. Where his life is defined by the defense of the group and the management of the threats to it, her life is defined by the relationships she maintains within the group and the reproductive investment she makes in her offspring. The female, who has been in the same group for many years, has the specific social knowledge of the specific individuals around her that the long familiarity produces, knowing which females are her allies and which are her competitors for the silverback's attention and protection, knowing the specific behavioral tendencies of the specific juveniles and which of them are worth investing affiliative energy in as future social partners. The specific relationships between the females of a mountain gorilla group vary enormously in their quality and their history, from the close long-term alliances of females who have been in the same group for decades and whose histories include the shared experience of the specific births and the specific deaths and the specific group events that constitute the social memory of the group, to the tentative and uncertain relationship of the recently transferred female who is still finding her position in the established social order of the group she has just joined. The long-established female knows where she stands. The newcomer is still learning, still negotiating the specific social position that the specific individuals of the specific group will allow her to occupy. The specific observations from the long-term studies of female transfer and female social integration have produced a detailed picture of the specific process through which the new female establishes herself in the gorilla group, the specific behavioral strategies she uses to build the relationships that her tenure in the group will depend on, and the specific factors that determine how quickly and how successfully the integration proceeds. The age and experience of the transferring female, the current composition of the group she is joining, the temperament of the silverback who leads it, the specific dynamics of the established females' relationships among themselves, all of these factors shape the specific trajectory of the specific individual's specific integration into the specific group. The gorilla and bamboo. The bamboo zones of the lower elevational ranges in the Virungas and Bwindi are the specific areas where the gorilla's diet most dramatically shifts from the general foliage diet to the specific concentrated exploitation of the bamboo shoots in the specific season of their emergence. A gorilla group in the bamboo during the shoot season is a group transformed in its behavior. The normally slow-moving herbivore suddenly highly active and highly motivated, moving quickly through the bamboo stands and consuming the young shoots with an intensity that reflects the specific value of the specific food in the specific season. The bamboo shoot is high in protein relative to the mature leaves and stems that constitute most of the gorilla's diet. And the gorillas exploit this protein window with the specific attention of animals that have learned through experience the specific timing and the specific locations of the bamboo's production. The specific knowledge of when and where the bamboo shoots are available, the fine-grained phenological knowledge of the specific stands within the home range and the specific timing of their production in the specific season, is the knowledge that the silverback carries through the years of leading his group through the annual cycle of the high-altitude forest. The older silverback who has been through the bamboo season dozens of times knows the specific bamboo stands with the specific precision of the long familiarity, moving the group toward the productive areas before the casual observer would have predicted the movement. The anticipatory navigation that the experienced animal's knowledge of the landscape's seasonal patterns supports. The gorilla researcher at night. The researchers who conduct the long-term behavioral monitoring of the mountain gorilla groups spend their days following the habituated families through the forest, recording the specific behavioral events of the specific individuals in the systematic way that the behavioral ecology requires. And they end their days at the research camps in or adjacent to the parks. The specific quality of the ending of a day in the Virunga or Bwindi forest, the specific transition from the active attention of the field observation to the specific rest of the field camp at the end of the day, is a transition that the researchers who have experienced it describe with the specific quality of the reward that the specific work's specific demands produce in the person who has met them. The specific sounds of the Virunga night from the research camp, the hyrax and the specific frogs of the mountain forest, and the occasional distant sound of the gorillas in their nests adjusting to the cold, are the sounds of the specific place that the specific researchers have been listening to through the specific nights of the specific years of the specific fieldwork. The familiarity of the sounds, the specific knowledge that those sounds belong to this specific place and no other, and that the animals whose presence the sounds attest to are the specific animals whose specific lives are the subject of the specific work, is the specific quality of the relationship between the researcher and the field site that the long-term study produces. The conservation debt. The 1,100 mountain gorillas alive today are the survivors of a population that came very close to extinction in the 20th century. The specific pressures of the poaching and the habitat encroachment and the civil conflict in the DRC, reducing the population to the point where the scientists and the conservationists working in the Virungas in the 1980s were genuinely uncertain whether the species could be saved. The specific decisions made during that period, the specific investments of money and institutional energy, and the specific personal commitments of the specific people who chose to spend their careers working in the specific forests for the specific animals, are the decisions whose specific consequences are the 1,000+ gorillas alive now. The conservation debt that we owe to those specific decisions and those specific people is the specific debt of the existence of the specific animals, the specific silverbacks and the specific females and the specific infants of the specific groups, in the specific forests that the specific 40 years of the specific sustained conservation effort has maintained. The debt is not abstract. It is expressed in the specific number of the specific individual gorillas, whose specific lives are the specific outcome of the specific work. 1,100. Each one the specific animal that the specific conservation has kept alive. The weight of the night. The breathing is very slow. The body is fully settled into the surface beneath it. The weight distributed through the specific positions of the specific joints and the specific muscles in the specific way of the fully relaxed body that has released the day's tensions and is doing what the body does when the day is done, which is to prepare for the deep rest that the biology requires. The mountain is above and the forest is around, and the gorillas are in their nests in the cold dark of the high-altitude night, and the morning is approaching in the specific way that the mountain morning always approaches, slowly and with the specific quality of the altitude that makes the first light different from the first light at lower elevations. The thinner air and the clarity of the mountain sky making the dawn a different thing from the dawn at the forest floor. The silverback is in his nest. The infants are against their mothers. The family is gathered in the specific area of the specific forest that the specific day's ranging has brought them to, and the night holds them in the specific way that the mountain night has been holding the gorilla families in these mountains for the entire duration of the species' presence here. The mountain is patient. The gorilla is patient. The night is patient. Sleep. The gorillas are in the mountain. The family is together. The forest holds everything. The night holds everything. Sleep. The long call will come with the morning. The family will move through the forest. The infants will play at the adults' feet. The silverback will lead. But that is morning. Now is the dark. Now is the rest. Now is the slow breath and the quiet mind and the heavy body at the threshold of the sleep. Sleep. The gorillas are there. The mountain holds them. 1,100 gorillas in the forests of Central Africa. The night holds all of them. Sleep. The forest is old. The mountain is patient. The night holds everything. Sleep. The gorilla's gaze. There is a quality in the gorilla's gaze that the researchers and the trackers and the rangers who have spent years in close proximity to habituated groups describe with a consistency that suggests it is real rather than projected. The gorilla looks at you, not through you or past you or at the general vicinity where you are, but at you, the specific individual in the specific position in the specific forest at the specific moment, attended to with the specific focused awareness of an intelligent social animal assessing a specific individual it has encountered. The assessment is brief. The silverback makes his judgment quickly, categorizes the human as non-threatening or as something to monitor more carefully, and returns his attention to the things that actually require it. But the brief moment of the direct attention, the gaze that holds your gaze for the second or two before it moves on, is the moment that the people who have experienced it remember. The gaze is not anthropomorphism. The gorilla's large forward-facing eyes are the eyes of the primate, evolved for the same reasons that the human's eyes are forward-facing, the specific demands of the arboreal life that selected for depth perception over the wide visual field of the prey animal. The gorilla and the human look at the world through eyes that are organized the same way, that process visual information through the same basic neural architecture, that attend to the social environment with the same general primate visual system. When the gorilla looks at you and holds your gaze briefly, it is doing what intelligent social primates do when they encounter an individual they need to assess. It looks at you with the attention that the assessment requires. The cognitive studies of perspective taking in gorillas, the ability to understand what another individual can and cannot see from their specific position, have confirmed that the gorilla can represent others' visual access to information and use that representation in the management of its own behavior. The gorilla that hides food from a dominant individual who cannot see it, or that approaches the food only when the dominant individual's gaze is directed elsewhere, is demonstrating the specific understanding of others' visual perspectives that the perspective-taking studies have documented in the experimental setting. The understanding that others have different visual access than you do is the specific cognitive foundation of the social intelligence that the great ape's complex social life requires. The gorilla and the forest elephant. In the lowland forests of the Western Gorillas Range, the western lowland gorilla shares its habitat with the African forest elephant, the smaller, more forest-adapted relative of the savanna elephant that inhabits the dense equatorial forest of the Congo Basin. The interaction between these two large herbivores in the shared forest is primarily one of avoidance and mutual spatial management. Both species too large and too well defended to be the prey of any shared predator, and therefore interacting primarily through the competition for the specific food resources that their overlapping diets produce. The forest elephant's impact on the vegetation, the specific opening of the forest canopy through the elephant's browsing and the elephant's path-making through the dense undergrowth, creates the specific forest structure that the gorilla's movement through the home range exploits. The elephant-made clearings and the elephant-used trails provide the gorilla with specific foraging opportunities in the specific areas of the forest that the elephant's physical force has altered. The larger animal's environmental modification creating the specific conditions that the gorilla's foraging can use. The ecological relationship between the forest elephant and the western lowland gorilla is not simply coexistence. It is the specific ecological interaction of two large herbivores whose different sizes and different physical capabilities create the specific shared landscape that both inhabit. The gorilla as indicator species. The mountain gorilla is sometimes described as an umbrella species or an indicator species for the health of the Central African montane forest ecosystem. The specific idea being that the conservation of the gorilla and its habitat provides the conservation umbrella that protects the entire community of organisms that inhabit the same forest. The specific mountain gorillas live in the same forest as the golden monkey, and the specific birds, and the specific invertebrates, and the specific plant species that together constitute the specific biological community of the Virunga and Bwindi forests. And the protection of the gorilla's habitat is the protection of the habitat of all of those organisms simultaneously. The indicator species concept captures something real about the relationship between the charismatic megafauna and the ecosystems they inhabit. The conservation of the most visible and the most compelling species, providing the resources and the institutional infrastructure that the conservation of the entire community requires. The specific ranger corps that patrols the Virunga and Bwindi forests to protect the gorillas is also removing the snares that would injure the specific golden monkey and the specific forest buffalo and the specific other animals of the forest. The specific community programs that reduce the human pressure on the park boundaries to protect the gorilla's habitat also protect the habitat of the specific bird species and the specific plant species and the specific amphibian species that the same forest supports. The gorilla at the center of the cultural moment. The mountain gorilla's conservation has been, since the publication of Dian Fossey's work and the subsequent film and the sustained media attention to the species situation, one of the most publicly visible conservation stories in the world. The specific combination of the animal's physical presence and their behavioral complexity, and the specific drama of the conservation struggle making the mountain gorilla one of the few endangered species whose situation is known and cared about by a significant portion of the global public. The specific response to the mountain gorilla's situation from the global public, the donations and the visits and the advocacy that the specific publicity of the species has generated has been one of the specific resources that the conservation program has been able to draw on in the specific decades of the recovery effort. The specific cultural moment in which the mountain gorilla has existed since the late 20th century, the moment in which its situation has been known and the conservation work has been sustained, is the specific moment in which the 1,000+ gorillas alive today have survived. The counterfactual is unverifiable, but suggestive. Without the specific public awareness and the specific institutional response that the awareness produced, the trajectory of the 1980s decline would have continued, and the current situation would be a very different one. The night that holds the mountain. The Virunga Mountains at night are the specific landscape of the specific Central African Rift, the volcanic peaks with their specific forest cover and their specific cold and their specific darkness constituting the specific world that the specific gorillas have been inhabiting since the species came into being. The night on the mountain has the specific quality of altitude. the thinner air making the cold more cutting, and the darkness more complete, and the sounds of the forest more distinct in the specific way that the mountain night is always more distinct than the lowland night. The specific clarity of the mountain atmosphere, carrying the sounds further and making them more immediate. The specific sounds of the Virunga night, the hyrax calling at intervals and the condensation dripping and the wind in the Hagenia trees, and the occasional distant gorilla vocalization, are the sounds that the specific animals in the specific nests have been sleeping to every night of their lives, the familiar acoustic background of the home that the sleeping brain processes as safe and known, without requiring the conscious attention that the unfamiliar would demand. The gorillas sleep well in their mountain forest. They are at home here, in the way that the animal is at home in the specific place that the specific evolution has produced it for. Your sleep is completing now. The breathing has found the rhythm of the deepest rest, the slow, regular cycle that the body maintains through the night without any conscious attention, the lungs and the heart doing what they do in the dark without requiring any direction from the mind that is itself becoming quiet. The mountain is above, and the forest is around, and the gorillas are in their nests in the cold dark, and the morning is somewhere ahead but not yet here. The silverback is in his ground nest, the silver saddle of his back barely visible in the dark. His breathing the specific slow respiration of the large animal at its deepest rest. The infants are tucked against their mothers, the small bodies warm in the contact that is the specific thermal and social security of the young gorilla's world. The family is together in the forest on the mountain in the night. Sleep, the gorillas are in the mountain. The family is together. The forest is old and dark. 1,100 gorillas in the forests of Central Africa, in the mountain cold, in the ancient family groups that their silverbacks have led through the years of the specific lives. The night holds all of them. Sleep. The morning will come. The long call will carry through the forest. The family will begin the day. But now is this, the dark, the rest, the slow breath, the mountain, the forest, the gorilla in the night, sleep. The night holds everything, sleep. The specific gorilla families of the long-term study, the individual animals that the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund's researchers have been following through the decades of the continuous monitoring in the Virungas, carry names that the specific researchers who have followed them gave them. And the specific histories of the specific families constitute the specific empirical foundation of the specific understanding of the mountain gorilla's social life. Cansby, the silverback who led the same group for over 2 decades, the specific duration of his tenure, making him one of the longest tenured silverbacks documented in the long-term studies and whose specific leadership through the specific events of the specific years produced the specific outcomes for the specific individuals of his specific group that the specific monitoring has recorded. Titus, the male who survived the poaching event that killed his family when he was an infant, who grew to become a silverback and who led his own group for years. The specific trajectory of his specific life from the specific traumatic beginning to the specific eventual successful tenure, constituting one of the specific stories from the long-term studies that the researchers who followed him through the years describe as among the most remarkable they witnessed. These specific individuals are not data points. They are the specific animals whose specific lives the specific research has recorded, and the specific knowledge of their specific lives is the specific knowledge that the specific science of the mountain gorilla's behavioral ecology is built from. The specific individual histories accumulated through the decades of the specific observation constitute the specific longitudinal record that allows the specific analysis of the specific factors that determine the specific outcomes for the specific individuals in the specific social environment of the specific mountain gorilla group. Without the specific individuals, there is no specific science. The science is the accumulation of the observations of the specific lives, the gorilla infant's first year. The specific developmental trajectory of the mountain gorilla infant through the first year of life has been documented in the detail that the habituation of the study groups allows, the specific behavioral milestones, and the specific changes in the infant's capabilities, and the specific changes in the infant-mother relationship through the first 12 months, providing the specific picture of the development that the comparative developmental biology of the great apes uses to understand the specific timing and the specific sequence of the specific primate's maturation. The infant that is born weighing approximately 2 kilograms and that clings to the mother's chest for the first months of life begins showing the first tentative explorations of the world beyond the mother's body at approximately 3 to 4 months. The specific brief ventures away from the mother and the specific returns to the contact with the mother, constituting the specific developmental behavior of the securely attached infant, beginning the exploration of the world. The play with other infants begins in the first year, the specific social play being one of the primary activities of the infant gorilla, once it has the motor capability to participate in the contact play that the social development requires. The infant that is playing with the other infants of the group at 8 or 10 months of age is developing the specific social skills and the specific physical coordination that adult life in the group will require through the specific mechanism of the play that is the primate's primary developmental tool. The specific cognitive development of the gorilla infant, the specific emergence of the object permanence, and the specific early causal reasoning, and the specific social understanding that the first year's development produces has been documented in the specific captive studies that provide the controlled observations that the wild study cannot easily supply. The Western lowland gorilla infant, in the well-managed zoological institution, observed through the systematic cognitive testing that the captive environment allows, shows the specific developmental trajectory that the comparative developmental psychology uses to understand the specific similarities and differences between the gorilla's cognitive development and the cognitive development of the human infant and the other great ape infants, the gorilla's longevity. The mountain gorilla lives in the wild for approximately 40 years, the specific lifespan reflecting the specific slow life history strategy of the large-brained, slowly reproducing great ape whose reproductive investment in each offspring is so high that the specific individual needs the specific decades of the adult life to realize the specific reproductive potential that the specific long development period represents. The female who reaches sexual maturity at approximately 10 years and who produces her first infant at 11 or 12, and who then has subsequent infants at 4-year intervals through the remainder of her reproductive life, may produce between 4 and 8 offspring over the course of her reproductive years, a reproductive rate that places each individual offspring at the center of the specific investment calculus of the specific female's specific reproductive life. The specific silverback who holds his group for 15 or 20 years before he is eventually displaced by a younger challenger has invested the specific decades of the specific tenure in the specific protection and the specific management of the specific group. And the specific offspring he has sired in those decades are the specific genetic legacy of the specific individual, the specific descendants whose specific existence is the specific biological outcome of the specific tenure. The silverback's long tenure is not simply a demonstration of his dominance. It is the specific mechanism through which the specific individual's specific genetic contribution to the specific population is maximized. The forest and the climate. The specific climate of the Virunga and windy forests, driven by the specific geography of the equatorial mountains and the specific circulation patterns of the Central African atmosphere, is changing in ways that the long-term monitoring programs have begun to document in the specific data of the specific observations over the specific years. The specific temperature increases and the specific changes in the precipitation patterns that the climate change projections predict for the Central African highland region will affect the specific phenology of the specific plants that the gorilla's diet depends on, the specific timing of the bamboo shoot emergence, and the specific availability of the specific foliage species through the specific seasons shifting in ways that may require the specific behavioral adjustments in the specific gorilla populations that the specific monitoring will need to track. The specific challenge of managing the conservation of the mountain gorilla in the context of the changing climate is the specific challenge of maintaining the specific conditions that the specific species requires in the specific landscape that the specific climate change is altering. The specific intersection of the biological conservation and the climate adaptation that the conservation biology of the 21st century increasingly requires. The specific protected areas that the mountain gorilla inhabits provide the specific buffer against the specific climate change impacts that the unprotected forest would not provide, the specific intact forest cover, and the specific altitudinal gradient of the Virunga volcanic chain, providing the specific range of elevation that the specific climate adaptation of the specific population may require as the temperatures rise. The morning light on the mountain. When the first light of the dawn reaches the specific canopy of the specific Virunga forest above the specific gorilla nesting site, the specific quality of the early mountain light in the specific atmosphere of the specific altitude, the light that the equatorial dawn produces at 3,000 meters being distinctly different from the equatorial dawn at sea level, begins the specific visual transition from the complete darkness of the night to the specific soft illumination of the pre-dawn forest that the gorillas stir into. The specific quality of this light, the specific pale gray that is the mountain's dawn before the sun actually appears above the eastern ridge, and the specific warmth of the first direct sunlight that follows the gray, is the specific daily visual signal that the gorilla's biological clock responds to in the waking process. The silverback in the first light is the specific figure of the large animal in the specific transition from the night's rest to the day's activity, sitting in his ground nest and looking around the specific area with the specific alertness of the fully waking dominant male, attending to the specific sounds and the specific movements of the waking forest, with the specific comprehensive awareness of the animal that is returning to full vigilance from the light sleep that has been his night's rest. The specific morning chest beat that some silverbacks produce in the first minutes after waking, a brief drumming that carries through the quiet forest as the announcement of the new day's beginning, is the specific behavioral expression of the specific return to the full authority of the specific dominant male in the specific light of the specific new day. Sleep. The specific quality of the sleep that is available to you now, in the warmth and the safety of the specific shelter that the specific human civilization has built around the specific human body, is the rest that the specific primate's specific biology has been working toward through the specific hours of the specific day. The mountain gorillas in their nests have their lighter sleep, the sleep of the arboreal and semi-arboreal primate that maintains the specific vigilance even in rest. You have the deeper rest that the shelter allows, the full surrender to the unconsciousness that the safety of the enclosed space makes possible. Both are the rest of the primate at the end of the day. Both are the rest of the animal whose specific biology requires the specific repair and the specific restoration that the sleep provides. Both are happening now, in the specific dark of the specific night that holds the specific gorillas in the specific mountain and the specific human in the specific shelter simultaneously, the same ancient mammalian rest performing the same ancient biological functions in both. Sleep now. The gorillas are in the mountain. The family is together, 1,100 in the forests of Central Africa. The night holds all of them. Sleep. The morning will come for the gorillas and for you. The light will reach the mountain forest. The silverback will make his first chest beat of the new day. The infants will begin to stir. The family will move through the forest. But now is the dark. Now is the rest. Now is the slow breath and the quiet mind and the sleeping body. Sleep. The gorillas are there. The mountain holds them. The forest is old. The night holds everything. Sleep.